Welcome to Tennessee's at-home learning series for literacy. Today's lesson is for all our 7th graders out there, though all children are welcome to tune in. This lesson is the first in our series. My name is Mrs. Alley, and I'm a 7th grade teacher in Tennessee schools. I'm so excited to be your teacher for this lesson. Welcome to my virtual classroom. Today, we will be learning about early American civilizations. Before we get started, to participate fully in today's lesson, there are a few things you are going to need. Make sure you have with you several sheets of paper, something to write with, and a hard surface to write on. I'll give you just a few moments to get those things together. Are you ready? Let's begin. Today's lesson focus, like I said, is to learn about the Maya, Aztec, and the Inca civilizations. Specifically, we're going to be thinking about what you've learned in school about early civilizations. Also think about how the earliest people from all over the world ended up where they settled. Why are they there? How did they get there? Why did they choose to settle there? How did their lives change once they settled? Moving from one place to another causes a lot of changes. Maybe some of you have experienced that. I'm sure you can relate. I've moved from one country to another and it created lots of different changes for myself and my family. So let's try to keep that in mind as we read through the changes these early civilizations experienced once they settled. We will be reading the first few pages of the text that we will use in our lesson series. It is called The Rise of Early American Civilizations. I will read each text twice. The first time will be for you to gain an understanding of the basic information that is being given to us through that piece of text. Then I will read it a second time. But in that second time, I'm going to pose a question. And that question is going to help you to focus on the text, on the specific part of the text that will help you answer that question. Make sure you always use textual evidence when answering any questions. Read along and listen carefully as I read. Our understanding of the history of humans living and working together begins in Africa more than 1 million years ago. Over time, humans began to migrate and eventually inhabited 6 continents: Africa, Asia, Europe, Australia, and the 2 Americas. Pause for a moment and think about what you understood from the first reading of this text. Now I'm going to read the text one more time. This time, I want you to pay attention to the paths that the early Americans took along the way. Essentially, think about how they landed where they landed. Why do you think they settled there? Our understanding of the history of humans living and working together begins in Africa more than 1 million years ago. Over time, humans began to migrate and eventually inhabited 6 continents: Africa, Asia, Europe, Australia, and the 2 Americas. So, how did they land where they landed? Early Americans migrated from all over the world because they were in search of land and resources. This is a really good reason to move on. A lot of the times it's hard to leave a place where you're comfortable, but the need for land and extra resources causes us to find a need to leave our sort of comfortable space and move on. And that's what the early Americans did. Think about the text again. I want you to tell me, according to the text, how long ago can we go back and try to understand the history of humans living and working together? Let's look at the text one more time. According to the text, we can go back more than 1 million years ago. That's a really long time. Take a look at this map. You can see that early Americans moved from Africa into Europe and Asia. And from there, some people moved into Australia. Others moved south through North and South America. I'm going to read another piece of our text for the day. And again, I'm going to read it twice. The first time, I want you to just listen for a basic understanding, comprehension of the text and what the author is trying to communicate. And then I will pose a focus question and read it again. Make sure you use textual evidence to answer. For many thousands of years, early hunter-gatherers traveled from place to place. They fished, hunted animals, and gathered wild plants. Between 12,000 and 5,000 BCE, some groups of people established more permanent villages. Often, these villages-based societies relied on farming, raising their own crops for food. Some learned to domesticate animals. Over time, animals were used for more than food in some regions. They helped people plow and fertilize the soil. They supplied milk and provided wool for clothes. Now we're going to read the text again, and this time I want you to think about two things. What do you think it means that some people learn to domesticate animals? So pay attention for when the text uses the word domesticate and think about what it means to domesticate an animal. And then I want you to think about how do domesticated animals help people? Also think about how you experience this in your daily lives. For many thousands of years, early hunter-gatherers traveled from place to place. They fished, hunted animals, and gathered wild plants. Between 12,000 and 5,000 BCE, some groups of people established more permanent villages. Often, these village-based societies relied on farming, raising their own crops for food. Some learned to domesticate animals. Over time, animals were used for more than food in some regions. They helped people plow and fertilize the soil. They supplied milk and provided wool for clothes. Were you able to use the text to answer your two questions? Let's see. So, what do you think it means that some people learn to domesticate animals? Good. It means to raise and train animals to live around humans. Think of how we still do this today. Many of you may have a pet at home. Any pets that we have living in our homes are trained too. Anything that you've trained your animal to do, like your cat, dog, or even a bird, is called domesticating. So we are all familiar with this if we have pets at home. How do domesticated animals help people? Think about what we read in the text. Now that we know that to domesticate an animal means to train it, How do you think domesticating an animal can help people, especially these people of the early civilizations? Great! They helped them plow and fertilize the soil so they could farm. They also supplied milk and provided wool for clothes. Seems like the animals were an essential part of these early civilizations. That sounds like the way many people still use animals today. Now we're going to read another portion of today's text. This one's a little bit longer, so I would like for you to make sure you listen very carefully as I read. And again, I will be reading this twice. The first time, just pay attention, listen carefully, make sure you understand. And then the second time, I will give you a focus question. Let's begin. As people settled down to farm, their lives changed. People learned to irrigate fields. They developed ways to store food, and populations grew. Between 4000 and 2000 BCE, towns and villages in various places developed into cities. People constructed buildings and worshipped gods. They made pottery and wove cloth. The city dwellers chose leaders and developed laws. Some people governed and others served. Civilizations were born. Civilizations developed from Africa to the Americas. The earliest civilizations arose in fertile river valleys in Africa and Asia. These civilizations flourished along the banks of the Nile, the Indus, the Yellow, the Tigris, and the Euphrates rivers. By 1000 BCE, new civilizations arose in the Americas. These early American civilizations are called pre-Columbian civilizations. This is because they developed long before Christopher Columbus's first voyage to the Americas in 1492. Three of these pre-Columbian civilizations were the Maya, the Aztec, and the Inca. Now we're going to read our text one more time. This time, I want you to think about the geographical features and how they impacted the way these civilizations lived. Our geographical features is nature that surrounds us, and it affects the way we live. It affects the resources we have access to. So again, as I read the second time, think about how the geographical features impacted the way these civilizations lived. As people settled down to farm, their lives changed. People learned to irrigate fields. They developed ways to store food. Populations grew. Between 4000 and 2000 BCE, towns and villages in various places developed into cities. People constructed buildings and worshipped gods. They made pottery and wove cloth. The city dwellers chose leaders and developed laws. Some people governed and others served. Civilizations were born. Civilizations developed from Africa to the Americas. The earliest civilizations arose in fertile river valleys in Africa and Asia. These civilizations flourished along the banks of the Nile, the Indus, the Yellow, the Tigris, and the Euphrates rivers. By 1000 BCE, new civilizations arose in the Americas. These early American civilizations are called pre-Columbian civilizations. This is because they developed long before Christopher Columbus's first voyage to the Americas in 1492. Three of these pre-Columbian civilizations were the Maya, the Aztec, and the Inca. One of the big questions we are trying to answer today is about the geographical features or characteristics of the Earth's surface in a certain place and how they impacted the way the Maya, Aztec, and Inca civilizations developed. When you think of geographical features, some things that may come to mind immediately are mountains, rivers, and some types of plants and animals living in the same place. I would like you to take a few minutes, grab a piece of paper, and add to this list by jotting down some geographical features that you know of. Here's what I added to the list. Ponds, lakes, deserts, valleys, forests. Maybe you added some of the same things. Did you think of anything different? Great. Let's move on. Here we have another piece of text. Again, I will read it twice. As people settled down to farm, their lives changed. People learned to irrigate fields. They developed ways to store food, and populations grew. Between 4000 and 2000 BCE, towns and villages in various places developed into cities. People constructed buildings and worshipped gods. They made pottery and wove cloth. The city dwellers chose leaders and developed laws. Some people governed and others served. Civilizations were born. Now we're going to read it a second time, and we're going to think about the word irrigated and what it means. As people settled down to farm, their lives changed. People learned to irrigate fields. They developed ways to store food. Populations grew. Between 4000 and 2000 BCE, towns and villages in various places developed into cities. People constructed buildings and worshipped gods. They made pottery and wove cloth. The city dwellers chose leaders and developed laws. Some people governed and others served. Civilizations were born. Let's reread the highlighted sentence. People learned to irrigate fields. What do you think the word irrigate means? Great. If these people are now in one place and setting up farming, they need ways to regularly supply water to their fields so they thrive and produce good crops. The word irrigate means to supply water to crops. Here's another portion of our text. Civilizations develop from Africa to the Americas. The earliest civilizations arose in fertile river valleys in Africa and Asia. These civilizations flourished along the banks of the Nile, the Indus, the Yellow, the Tigris, and the Euphrates rivers. By 1000 BCE, new civilizations arose in the Americas. These early civilizations are called pre-Columbian civilizations. This is because they developed long before Christopher Columbus's first voyage to the Americas in 1492. Three of these pre-Columbian civilizations were the Maya, the Aztec, and the Inca. Let's look at our focus question for this portion of the text. Listen for the major geographical feature we are focusing on and think about why civilizations would choose to settle there. So again, we're looking for one major geographical feature that this portion of the text is focused on, and think about why the early civilizations would choose to settle around this specific geographical feature. Civilizations develop from Africa to the Americas. The earliest civilizations arose in fertile river valleys in Africa and Asia. These civilizations flourished along the banks of the Nile, the Indus, the Yellow, the Tigris, and the Euphrates rivers. By 1000 BCE, new civilizations arose in the Americas. These early American civilizations are called pre-Columbian civilizations. This is because they developed long before Christopher Columbus's first voyage to the Americas in 1492. Three of these pre-Columbian civilizations were the Maya, the Aztec, and the Inca. So what major geographical feature are we focusing on here? As you can see in the text, the answer is rivers. Why do you think these civilizations chose to settle along the banks of rivers? Think about how rivers can be helpful to us in everyday life. Good. Rivers provided a source of drinking water and a method of transportation. River valleys had fertile soil for growing crops. Like lots of other early civilizations, the Maya, Aztec, and Inca knew how important rivers and fertile soil were to their survival. Let's move on to the next step in today's lesson. For this part of our lesson, we're going to make a list. Grab a piece of paper. Let's get started. At the very top of your paper, I would like you to write this question. Let's think about what kind of life the earliest people in the Americas led. Let's take a look at a list that answers this question. They were hunter-gatherers. If you don't have that on your list, go ahead and add it. They traveled from place to place. They eventually settled to farm, which means they now had to grow and irrigate crops, domesticate animals, and store food. After the civilizations grew, they developed cities, governments, made pottery, constructed buildings, and practiced religion. Now we're going to move on to the independent practice. I'm going to explain exactly what it is that you're going to be doing, and then when our lesson is done, you can take some time alone to complete it. At this point in our reading, we have learned that many thousands of years ago, hunter-gatherers chose to settle in one area versus traveling from place to place. Take some time and write a paragraph or two explaining how the lives of these early civilizations changed once they settled down. In order to prepare for writing, I always like to complete a do-what chart. This is what it looks like. This chart helps me to remember what it is I need to write about. On the left side, I have a list of things I need to do, and on the right side, I have what I need to do. So the first thing I need to remember is that I need to write 1 to 2 paragraphs. Then I need to keep in mind that in those paragraphs, I'm going to be explaining how the lives of these early civilizations changed once they settled. I'll give you a few moments to jot this down. Your response should include the following. They had to learn to farm, which means they had to grow and irrigate crops. They had to domesticate animals. They had to store food. They had to develop cities, establish governments, construct buildings, and practice religion. In this portion of today's lesson, we're going to wrap it up by preparing for the next lesson. In order to prepare for our next lesson, you'll need a clean sheet of paper. We are going to draw a 3-column chart. On your screen, you see a sample of the 3-column chart we are going to create. Let's take a few minutes to make this chart on our paper. The first column is titled Maya. The second column is titled Aztec. And the final column is for the Inca. Here's what my chart looks like. Now, I tend to write a little bit bigger than most people, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make a second chart for myself. We're going to be using these in the following lessons that we have coming. So make sure that if you need to, you make more than one and you have it handy and ready to go for our next lesson. I really enjoyed learning about early American civilizations with you today. Thank you for inviting me into your home. I look forward to seeing you for Lesson 2 in Tennessee's At Home Learning Series. Goodbye and have a great day.